thanks for joining us for this week's Weather Extra. I'm meteorologist Jillian Grace. 70 years ago on May 11th, the deadliest tornado in Texas history since 1900 struck downtown Waco, forever changing the city. KWTX chief meteorologist Brady Taylor put together an hour-long documentary about the 1953 tornado called Monster from the Sky. And today we're going to share some of the stories from the documentary from those that survived that fateful day. We begin Weather Extra by hearing Gloria Dobroni's story, who tragically lost her father and close friend that day 70 years ago.
The principal kept coming on the loudspeaker at school telling us that they were having some bad weather out west. And I think it started in San Angelo. And there was a possibility, but then later came on and said everything seemed to be clear and just to go about our usual whatever we wanted to do, which is what we did. Well, we had some parakeets, and we needed some feed for the parakeets from the Texas Seed Company, which was 4th and Franklin. And so my friend and I, after school, back then families didn't have but one car. Well, some families had 2 cars, but not any I knew. And so my mother worked at a drugstore, and she had the car, so we went to pick the car up from her, and then met my daddy after he got through working, and we were going downtown to the Texas Seed Company to get bird seed for the parakeets. Well, before we got down there, before I even picked Daddy up, it was getting bad, and like that people have said, the hail was actually at least as big as a softball, if not bigger. But we had that metal visor on the outside of our car, and it would just, hit that visor. I don't think one ever hit the windshield and, make a loud noise. And my friend Barbara was really scared, and I kept saying, Barbara, I don't know why you're so scared, because the Indians said Waco would never have a tornado, So, and I just kept driving, doing what I was supposed to do. And when we got down there was no parking place in front of the store. This is all parallel parking. So Daddy got out of the car and went into the Texas Seed Company, and I drove around the block. And when I came back, there was a place right in front. So I parallel parked, which I probably couldn't do now. But anyway, about that time is when it started getting bad. And Daddy was standing in the doorway, motioning us to come in with him. And Barbara was on the not the driver's side, but the passenger side. And she opened the door, got out of the car, and the wind was so bad it almost blew her down the street. So Daddy reached out, pulled her into the store. And before I could move from the driver's side to the passenger side to get out, it happened. I never had a chance to get out of the car, which probably saved my life. When the tornado hit, all the debris, bricks and mortar and wood beams and whatever, came down on everything, and came down on my car. But because of that visor, I think it broke the fall of some of it and didn't come into the car. But enough was in the car that I had a lot of gunk and stuff in my hair, so. But other than that, nothing was inside the car. But the car was, people said, how on earth did you ever get out of that car alive? Because the parts of the car that did come in and fall in, it stopped that far from my head where I was sitting. So I know I wasn't the only person in that car. There was somebody else in there with me that stopped that roof from coming in on me. So immediately after it happened, it was deathly still and quiet, and people started coming out and walking over all that stuff up and down the street, But there's no way I could have opened the car door. I did try it and couldn't because of the stuff that was piled up. But right after it happened, and those 2 men that came walking down all that debris on the street and got me out of the car, I ran over to where Daddy was and started trying to dig him out. And then somebody else, I guess I was hysterical. And somebody came up, and they didn't actually slap me, but they kind of shook me and brought me back to reality, I guess. I knew my daddy was dead. I knew that, because when I finally saw my mother the first time, she said, "Where's your daddy?" And I said, "He didn't make it. He's still downtown." And of course, we didn't know about Barbara because I didn't see her since she'd gone up to the back of the store. My mother, she had to call my girlfriend's parents, and they knew she was with me, but they didn't know where we were. They didn't know that there was a tornado. They didn't know we were in it. So my mother had to call Barbara's parents and tell them. Your child is in school, your child is with her friend, and I know my child is going to be with my friend until she brings her home, and then all of a sudden you get a phone call, your child has been in a tornado downtown and they can't find her. I mean, what could be worse than that? Barbara, my friend that was killed, she and I had a lot of classes together, and when I went back to school after that happened, the teachers had made sure that somebody was sitting in her chair and there wasn't just an empty chair sitting there in the classroom. I thought that was very thoughtful.
Welcome back to Weather Extra. Next, we hear from Carolyn King, who was almost 9 at the time the tornado struck. She was watching a movie downtown that day and recalls the story of her dad looking for her after the tornado tore through.
It was 3 days before my 9th birthday. Of course, that morning I went to school, and at best I remember, we got out at the usual time. No indication of storm or anything coming. And I went downtown, my dad's pharmacy, there on 5th up to Austin Avenue, and went around in front of the dentist building and I guess Chris's Cafe, and then the theater was right there. Probably got a little bored at the pharmacy and asked Dad if I could go to the movie. And he said, go ahead. So I went to the movie. I was on the 4th Street side of the theater, all the way at the front, first chair on the first row, like most of the kids, But Daddy always knew that's where I'd be. It was right there. The movie started normal, and I can't tell you how long it went, probably not very long. And then the lights went out. And of course the movie stopped. Well, that wasn't unusual then. So you kind of sit there and wait for them to fix the tape or whatever they do. It wasn't dark there because they had the emergency lights you could see. After a little bit, I just got kind of antsy. It's kind of like, this is taking way too long. I wonder what's wrong. And so I decided that I would go out to the lobby and got up and started up the side aisle. And I got probably a third to half of the way up when the ceiling came in. And a beam dropped and hit the wall above my head. And of course, all the debris fell, but it didn't touch me. And after everything quit moving, I just walked out. And a lot of people were already in the lobby, and there was debris all over the street. And I still, of course, had no idea what happened. I was going to go out the door and go find my dad and tell him, gee, did you see what happened, And a man who was in the lobby was a customer at the pharmacy. And he stopped me and told me, no, you can't go out there yet because, they say there's wires down. And I recognized him, so I said, okay. And I waited. And when they let us out, he went with me. And we went over to Washington and up to 6th Street and across. And we got down to the alleyway between Austin and Franklin, and it was clear. So we went down the alley to get to the pharmacy, which was the second place in from there. And of course, front windows were all gone, and he went in to look for Daddy, and Daddy wasn't there. And so he left me with Mr. and Mrs. Stone, who had the cleaners there on the corner. And he went back Franklin and around to 4th and came back to the theater and found Daddy all the way in the front of the theater digging in the debris because he knew where I would be sitting. My stepmom worked in a small loan company over there in the Paget building. She wasn't hurt. And I think her boss probably kept her corralled for a while because he told her, when he realized there was probably a storm coming, he told her to get under a desk. They had those big old heavy desks, and she had on a new dress, I guess, and she refused to get under the desk, so he more or less chunked her under, and probably saved her from being hurt because, again, their windows imploded. I think it's absolutely miraculous that the three of us were so close, right at the edge of that tornado. And I just walked out. My stepmom walked out, and Daddy, of course, was injured with the hit to his head. Some piece of debris, apparently, and I was told it was the head of a parking meter, they were about like that, was ripped off, the pole and came through the window and hit him in the right temple. And being my age now, I think, well, it's a wonder that didn't kill him outright. But we all walked out.
Welcome back. Next, we hear from Alta Powers, who remembers driving downtown with her mom and sister back on May 11th, 1953, and shares with us what it was like outside while the tornado was tearing through.
My mother picked my sister and I up from school early because she had a doctor's appointment downtown. That was where the doctors were at that time. And we went down. The doctor took my sister's stitches out of her foot, but it was raining really hard then. It was bad weather by then. And Mother said, y'all wait here under the cover while I get the car. Well, we did. We got in the car, and she headed over to Washington out of downtown, and it started hailing. The hailstones were the size of softballs. They were big, and we had a new car. So my mother said, I'm going to Doug's. Her brother had a service station at 5th and Webster, and she said we can get under the awning there. So we turned and went back down to 5th Street and headed over to Webster. Only got to the railroad tracks when the headlights would no longer penetrate the darkness. It had just gotten black. And headlights, how does the atmosphere get so thick that your headlights don't penetrate? So Mother stopped as we got to the railroad tracks, and we started praying. Not knowing what was going on. And suddenly a telephone pole fell on the front of our car, and the only injury was a tiny little scar on my finger because I had my hand on the dashboard. And about that time, I think it was Easy Monday Laundry Starch building was to our right, and it fell onto the back of our car, and all of the cars parked along the curb. The doors popped open. It was an experience. And whenever it cleared enough, it was still raining, but Mother got out and said, y'all wait right here. Now, the cars at the curb were maybe 2 feet tall because they were just squashed to the ground. It was something. Mother got her brother, who came and carried my sister piggyback down to his station since she was on crutches, and water was running knee deep. How people kept from getting electrocuted, no idea, because the power lines were down in that water we were walking through. But I guess God was looking after us. So we got to my brother's, my mother's brother, my Uncle Doug, and he had a car and said, y'all can take the car and go home. God was looking after us. Even though our car got badly damaged, we were not. We were safe.
And here is Barry High's story as he remembers being caught by the strong winds from that powerful tornado.
School on Monday, they let us out early because of bad weather impending. They wanted to get everybody home before the bad weather hit. Many of us didn't go straight home. There was a local pool hall down on Franklin Street that the kids frequented, and a bunch of them went down there. And I went down to Durwood Inman's motorcycle shop on Franklin, he had a place there to clean your motorcycles up and things, so I did that. And it was starting to get pretty dark and still. And so I mounted my motorcycle and went up 7th Street and across Austin. And if you caught the light green, you could, on a motorcycle, is a pretty fun place to transit through there. And when I hit Austin Street, there was debris blowing in the air, and the wind caught me. It was kind of humorous. I said, whoa, what was that? But I was in it and out of it so fast, and I went on home, had no idea what had happened. And my dad came home. He'd been at his place of business at 8th and Webster, which was right across from Katy Park. And he came home with the car all beat up and the windows knocked out of it, and he was pale as a ghost. And so I came back downtown and found some of my friends, and we stayed for the next 24 hours just working on recovery. And of course, the military, James Connolly Air Force Base, had a bunch of people come from there that were participating, and they provided a lot of security, at street corners and things that assisted the police. It was amazing. A lot of people, and people brought their equipment, their trucks and their bucket lifts and whatever they had that could be used to move debris to get people out. I remember I didn't spend a lot of time at the RT Dentist building, but I knew of the operations going on there trying to get those people out. And that was a big deal because there was a lot of heavy timbers and things piled on top of people. And they got a lot of them out. We had brick lines. They had a lot of brick lines where we were just passing bricks out and either piling them up or throwing them in a truck that had been brought up for that. And but the timbers, in fact, all the debris was, trucked out of there once it was the heavy stuff moved by equipment, but a lot of hand digging went on in those buildings. And us kids spent probably more time on the brick lines than any other form of rescue. And it is sorely needed at that time too.
Welcome back to Weather Extra. Now we hear from Mary Chapman, whose father was working downtown at the RT Dentist building. He wrote a letter recalling his experience of what it was like riding out that deadly F5 twister.
My father's name was Max Halvey. He was an independent electrician at the dentist building. He was hired to clean up all the fans and hang them to get them ready for summer because they didn't have air conditioning. And so he was just finishing up on the 5th floor, and when they came up and said, "You need to come downstairs. There's going to be a tornado." And he said, "Well, I just have to finish my job here, and then I'll be down." And that saved his life.
I had just finished my work and started to go down when the storm hit. I got to the first steps as the lights went out. I saw I couldn't make it. I didn't know any other way down, so I figured I'd ride it out. The top of the building was shaking like a sailboat in the wind, and it sounded like sledgehammers were popping away on the building below. Then all of a sudden everything went out from under me. It seemed as if I was floating on top of the building with a ringside seat on a tornado. Something pressed against my rib and kept me standing all the way down. I didn't see much because I was facing the east wall, and suddenly everything stopped. I found myself standing hip deep in debris next to the Joy Theater wall, facing toward Austin Avenue. Right there, I stopped and thanked the Lord. It was time to. What saved me was the roof blew over into 5th Street, and the way the wall collapsed, the bottom of the building collapsed first, and the walls beside me flipped to the ground from the bottom up like a piece of paper sliding through your fingers. Everything seemed all right until just after the wind passed, and then the building crashed. Bill Watkins, who was killed, was up there showing some dining room furniture to some customers about 45 minutes before, but they all left. When it stopped, everything stopped. There wasn't a stick that moved afterward. I heard a man call for help and a woman scream, but I couldn't tell where it came from. I was about 20 feet above the street and dug myself out with my free hands. It was raining, so I stood under a skylight for a while to get out of the rain. I took stock of myself and found all my tools in my pockets. My glasses were still on, only my hat was missing. My clothes weren't even torn. I brushed myself off and went over to the Tom McCain store to see if I could get a ride home. My wife and family knew I was at the store and had heard it was destroyed. When I got out of the car, they were shocked at first and then started babbling and crying. I had heard the storm warnings, but I'm an old-timer here and wasn't alarmed too much. I thought it would just be a blower like the rest. What did I think about at that time? Nothing. I guess I was just close enough to heaven.
To hear more stories like you heard today or to watch the full hour-long documentary Monster from the Sky on YouTube, scan the QR code right here behind me. That's all we have for you for this week's Weather Extra. See you next time.